Hello and welcome to another Hempsall's Putting into Practice vodcast for the Business Map series. I'm Kate Haythornthwaite and I'm joined by Matt Udale. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of background?
Yes, of course. Hello, yes, I'm Matt. I'm a journalist by background. I worked for the BBC for 18 years and newspapers before that, and then worked in corporate communications in the NHS before setting up Arch Communications, which is a public relations and marketing agency. And one of the things we do a lot of work with is social media. And indeed, I've been helping to deliver social media training with Hempsall's for a while now, and that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks, Matt. So we've done some previous podcasts. We've introduced the business map. We've considered what's changing through using the business map, reflections on the provider webinar that we held in January this year. And they can all be accessed on the YouTube channel via the links on the Foundation Year's website. But today what we're going to be exploring is the use of social media. For early years and childcare providers, social media, it's a key consideration. It's a great way to promote and market services and a great way to be communicating with parents and families who are currently using your setting and prospective families and parents too. But obviously it's something that needs very careful consideration and attention as there are many pitfalls and risks. And that's what we'd like to think about today with Matt. Many things to think about. So we'll look at the different types of social media. Matt will give us some top tips and tricks and how to avoid those common pitfalls so that we can use it effectively to support our marketing in the safest way possible. So Matt, I'm just going to ask you a few questions that hopefully will support providers listening in. So I'm a provider. Why should I think about using social media?
Well, it won't come as a surprise, I think, to anyone watching this podcast when I say that the way we consume information has changed massively over the last 15 years, really, as the internet has grown, as social media have grown. More and more people are getting their information and interacting with other people online now. So what does that mean? That means that all your customers, your potential customers, parents, and indeed other people who may be important to you, other stakeholders, they're all on social media and online anyway. So the people you want to communicate with, you know where they are. So why not use those channels to reach them? It's a bit of a no-brainer. It's fair to say also that your competitors are probably also there too. So if you're in a situation where you might be competing for children, that you have spaces and you want to get more children in, if you're not on a social media platform and a competitor of yours is, then instantly you're at a disadvantage from a marketing perspective. There are some other advantages to social media as a way of marketing yourselves too. The first is that it's free. There aren't many forms of marketing which are actually free. Yes, it takes some time and thought, and we'll talk a bit more about that, I'm sure, later on, but there is no other cost, and that's fantastic. Unless, of course, you want to go down the route of paid for advertising, which is a whole new issue that we might touch upon later too, but basic activity is free. The other thing is, which again we'll talk about later, I'm sure, is that you can target. So there's a lot of information out there about the sorts of people that are on different platforms. So you can work out where you're most likely to find the people you want to reach. Also, unlike a lot of other forms of communication, it's not just a question of you talking at people. You can have conversations. It's interactive, and which is fantastic for building relationships, very good for building your brand, telling people what you're all about, and explaining to people why they should come to you. And the last thing is, it's very easy to measure. So you can instantly see at a glance how many people are following you, how many people have interacted with every post you put out there, how many people like it. You can see which types of posts get the most response, because that's what you want, particularly sharing. And again, I'm sure we'll talk about sharing content later, because that's the golden fleece, if you like, of social media. That's what you want people to do, is really pass it on so they do the work for you. And you can also, most importantly, see what's not working. So all of this helps you to understand how you're marketing yourselves effectively on social media or not, great, why not use it?
Brilliant. Ooh, lots of advice there. I think perhaps one of my concerns, Matt, is that there's so many different platforms, and how do I know which one to use and which one's the best one to use for different messaging? You know, how do I match that messaging?
Yeah, well, again, it's a very good question. There is a bewildering choice, and it's constantly changing too. New platforms come on. I mean, 2 years ago, who had heard of TikTok, for example? And probably 2 years from now, there'll be some other new kid on the block that will be attracting people's attention. So it requires a bit of thought. And the first thing to say, by way of reassurance, is there's an awful lot of information you can find online, actually. Just by Googling, you can find out how many people are on Facebook, the sort of people that are on Facebook and other platforms. So you can do that research yourself. First of all, some basic stats. So just to reinforce the point really about why consider social media as a form of marketing, 93% of all UK households have internet access now. That's the vast majority of all of us. 91% of adults are using the internet every week, and probably 80 or 90% are buying online. And I must stress, these figures were pre the pandemic. Obviously, our use of social media has increased massively. People have got used particularly to shopping online that weren't shopping online previously. So these figures are going up all the time. 2/3 of the entire population of this country are on social media. If you look at just some of the numbers, this is where you start to go through that thought process about what's going to work best for me. Facebook is number one, more than 30 million active users on Facebook. There are even more accounts than that, but quite a few of them are dormant. Facebook is probably the first place where you should be thinking, if you haven't got a social media presence already, thinking of starting. Why? Well, first of all, it is the biggest. It has got the right sort of people on it. So 49% of users are aged 25 to 44, which means a lot of them are in that age bracket, you're going to have young children. It's also the place where people tend to gravitate on social media for what I call the softer side of life. So that's friends and family. People post an awful lot of stuff about what they're up to with friends and family on Facebook, which means they're naturally receptive to messages about children and childcare. So you're pushing at an open door. And also, I mentioned conversations a moment ago. It's a brilliant place to have conversations because it's very easy for people to comment, and you can ask questions and the whole conversation threads can build. So that's probably the number one. And it's certainly number one in terms of size. You've then got the likes of Instagram, which is growing fast. It's got 24 million users in the UK now. They tend to be younger. It very much started as a young person's platform, but has got older as businesses and other people have seen how popular it is. Most people will know Instagram because they'll have their own accounts, but there are a couple of big differences with Facebook. The first is it's very much driven by pictures. If you haven't got an image or a piece of film to post, you can't post on Instagram. That's different from Facebook, where you can just post text if you want to. So that might hold you back if you're in a childcare situation, you haven't got images to share. The second one is it's very mobile friendly, which is a plus because everyone consumes information on the go now, but not necessarily in front of a computer, as I am now. So Instagram is worth considering if you can get around the picture issue. The third one that's probably worth mentioning is Twitter. Now, Twitter has 14 million users in the UK. People are often surprised it's not more than that. It's quite a bit smaller than the other two. And a lot of people will understand Twitter. It's very bite-sized. What you can post is very short and punchy. Yes, you can add photographs and film, but you're limited in what you can post. And it tends to be quite different from Facebook, which was very social. This is more about issues. It's about business. It's about politics. Lots of people follow celebrities on Twitter, and we all know about the negative side of it, the trolling and what have you that goes on. So it has a different feel. It's a very good way of signposting, driving people to your website, for example, or sharing hard information, but it's probably not as good a place for having those softer conversations. So that might help you decide where you go. And it's important not to forget other sites too. Don't forget YouTube. If you're producing films about what goes on in your setting, even if it's just a virtual tour at the moment, because people can't visit. Do think about putting it on YouTube, because YouTube is absolutely huge. Billions of users worldwide. In fact, it's the second biggest search engine in the world after Google. So it's absolutely massive. So there are other ways you can sort of share material through social media and just by generating words. So to sum up, I think if you're really starting from scratch, Facebook is the place to start. And the other thing I would say at this point is don't overstretch yourself. It would be very easy to think I want to be on everything. But having then made that decision, you've got to create the content to keep those accounts active on all those different platforms. That's a lot of work if you're on all of them. So maybe that's not the wisest thing to do to start with.
Oh, that's great advice. Thanks, Matt. So sounds as though I might be starting with Facebook then. Great. I suppose the other thing for me is, being in a busy setting, if I'm a provider, I haven't got a lot of time. So how often should I be posting, and how can I get help with that post frequency?
Yeah, so that's another really important question. One of the reasons why we as a business are paid to run other organizations' social media accounts is because those people don't feel either that they don't have the time to do it properly, or that actually they don't really know how to do it properly. And I would say to anyone who wants to use social media, and yes, you probably should be using social media for your marketing, is you have to be prepared to commit to doing it properly. So what does that mean? Well, it varies across the platforms. One of the other advantages of Facebook is because Facebook posts tend to stay on people's timelines quite a long time. Once a day is fine. On Instagram, you can maybe get away with once a day, but it probably needs to be 2 or maybe 3 times a day. Twitter is the hungry one. Twitter, probably 4 to 6 tweets a day. Why so many? Because people tend to follow a lot of people on Twitter, so that their timeline is constantly shifting, which means that your tweet will only be seen by them for a few minutes before it's pushed out by other things that come along. So that's why you have to be tweeting a lot. There are ways around that. You can stagger tweeting across the day. So you can post the same thing at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning as at midday on a Tuesday and 3 p.m. on a Wednesday. That's because people use social media at different times, and they're unlikely to see very often any repeated content that you put out. That's only on Twitter. So people worry about that. When I say once a day, I mean every day. That's weekends and holidays, and you might be able to take a break for Christmas Day. But actually, people expect social media to be active all the time now. Now, people worry about that. They think I haven't possibly got the time to do it. But trust me, it is possible. It is entirely possible to sit down and plan ahead. Right, what am I going to say on the 1st of the month, the 2nd of the month, the 3rd of the month, and so on. And in half a day, I know, because we do this for our clients, you can sit down and write a month's worth of content. And that's the way to do it. You actually create a little grid for yourself and say, right, and that way you can also see that you're mixing up the content, so you're not saying the same thing too much, because that gets boring and then people lose interest in you. So that's quite a good way of working out in advance what you want to say. And then there are scheduling tools out there. So Facebook has its own. If you go onto the publishing tools part of your page, there's the option to create and schedule posts. There are Twitter has its own scheduling tool called TweetDeck, which is free to access. Just find it online. And there are other platforms too, called Hootsuite is a very well-known one, and there's another one called Buffer, which again you can find online. These are free to use. The great thing about something like Hootsuite, if you are on more than one platform, you can schedule all of them through the one tool. So you can write something for Facebook on next Monday, and then change it into a short version for Twitter, and you can schedule it also to go out on the same day using this one tool. So half a day to write the content, a bit more time to schedule it in, and Bob's your uncle. You've got a whole month's worth of content ready to go. Great thing about that is that if you've got a really busy day, you don't have to worry about posting anything because you know you've already sorted it. Then if you do have something spontaneous, something great, exciting or funny happens in the workplace or in your childcare setting, you want to share that straight away, fine. Then you're just adding you're creating value to what you've already scheduled. So yes, there's a bit of effort in it, but it doesn't have to be as onerous as you may think if you're organised.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great, Matt. I wasn't aware of those scheduling tools, so definitely be something to consider and make life a little bit easier. So I've sort of got the gist of where perhaps I'm going with what platform I want to use and how often. But what sort of things do I include in my post? You know, I know you were talking about photographs and video clips and all of that sort of thing, but how can I make it interesting, and what sort of information should
Well,
I be doing?
yes, you see, that's the other big question that people always ask. The first one is, have I really got the time? And the second one is, what on earth am I going to talk about? It's the blank page syndrome, isn't it? It's hard to come up with ideas every day when you're starting from scratch. But actually, if you take a step back and think about all the things that you have to talk about, there's a lot. And I'll just list a few of them now to help. Um, the stuff that just happens in your setting. So if you're having an open day or there's some event going on, you can talk about that in advance, and then you can talk afterwards about how it went. Maybe also by sharing some photographs of the event. So you get two bites at the cherry there. You can obviously share information about how many places you've got available in your setting if you're actually looking for new children to come in. And then at the same time, you can also talk about the universal childcare that is available to people. So that's an incentive for people to even consider childcare possibly for the first time. There's hard information like, what are the times you're open? What does Ofsted say about you? And not just your rating, but is there other one or two nice little quotes in the report they gave you, which you can actually use to show that you're a really good standard setting. What's special about you? What's your unique selling point? What are you especially proud of? Could be your facilities, your philosophy, some of the activities you put on, the diversity of the children you look after. They're all things you can share with your audience. Just pictures of you and your colleagues at work, just doing what you do. And I would include in that at the moment, all those precautions you're taking to keep your setting safe if you've got children with you. So wiping down services, washing your hands, getting your children to do the same sort of thing. Useful information that's going to be handy for parents of young children. It doesn't have to be necessarily about your childcare, but could be about encouraging them to bring some sunblock on a really hot day, or it could be signposting some useful and relevant activity that's going on in your local community that you heard about. You're just adding value to your feed. Are you one of those people that likes to share opinions and talk about childcare policy and just the whole issue of childcare and how you develop your children to a young age? Maybe you write blogs. Some of that would create interesting content for your social media. Share what's relevant from others. So who else in your community might be of interest to parents of young children? That could be a play centre, it could be an adventure playground, it could be a community centre. Follow these organisations on social media and then share their content to your own feed. And again, that's another way of adding value. Thank yous and testimonials from happy parents. I'm sure you must get them. Always ask if you do receive them, can I share this on social media? Can I use this? If they've taken the trouble to say a nice thing about you, the chances are they'll say yes. Those are wonderful on social media. And you can even create little graphics out of these. If you create a PowerPoint page, put your logo on it, put the really nice quote, as long as it's not too long, onto the page, put some nice quotation marks around it, save it as a JPEG, and then you've got a lovely image that you could share and say, we've had this lovely testimonial from a parent, and people can read what it says. A couple of other thoughts. PEGs, so everything is an awareness day or awareness week these days. There are websites you can go to online to actually find out what these awareness days and weeks and months are. And a lot of them are relevant to children. So you can use these to inspire yourselves with different types of content. And you can also tap into other assets. So I talked about other things that might be going on in your community, but there are some other really good resources out there that you can just either share from their feeds or you can actually use as your own. Things like childcare choices on the government website. They actually produce brilliant material for use on social media. the Hungry Little Minds campaign is another really good website that you can go to, and you can just use this stuff. And so that's all ideas for what do I actually write about. And you mentioned pictures, Kate. Well, yes, pictures are really important. So it's, if you can, start to build up a library of activity in your setting, so you've got images that you can use as and when, if there isn't something particularly to take on that day. But don't also forget that there are a couple of other ways that you can illustrate what you're putting out there. One is emojis. So if you can use your phone to post something onto a social media platform, and you've got the emojis there, which just lift sometimes a post. You don't want to use it all the time because it gets a bit over the top, but every now and again it's nice. And the same goes for memes or GIFs. And if you don't know what these are, a meme is a photograph with a caption on it. And a GIF is the same thing, but with a very short piece of film, usually literally 2 or 3 seconds. And on both Twitter and Facebook, in the window you have to create a post, you will see there is a GIF button, and you can actually search for these, type in an emotion, say happy or excited or busy, and it'll give you lots of choices, and you can attach one of those to your post. And they're usually quite funny. So that's a way of showing a bit of personality. Again, don't do it every day because it becomes a bit samey, but it gives you another alternative. So I hope that list actually shows there's an awful lot to go at.
Yeah, definitely, Matt. You know, that's the thing that I was struggling with, really. You know, what do we put on, and, you know, where do we go with all of this information? You know, we can use it, like you say, the Childcare Choices website, to just raise awareness for parents about, and, you know, the different entitlements, and also, you know, the support that they can get for any childcare that they paid for. So I'm sure providers listening in really welcome that, because that's something I think I would struggle with what content do I have to put in? And I suppose linking into that, we've talked about using photographs and imagery. I suppose the concern that people will have is about using photographs of the children in the setting, and how they manage that process, and so that they don't sort of upset families and parents. Have you any ideas about how providers can get around that?
Yeah, most certainly, and it's really important that actually you consider the risk side of running social media. That is yet another reason that I often get played back to me when people say, "Well, I'm a bit reluctant," and I say, "Why?" And the three reasons are no time, no idea what to say, and the third one is I'm worried that I'm not really in control of it, because anyone can comment or say something negative. So there are a few risk things to think through, and the issue of consent is a really good place to start. So you in child care settings will be very aware of the need to get permissions from parents for all sorts of activities. That includes clearly capturing imagery, whether it's photographs or indeed video. It's really important you have a consent form that you invite your parents to sign to see if they are prepared to give any consent. But in doing so, consider the different and understand the different levels of consent. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that people may be very happy to have a picture of their daughter or son in your newsletter that goes out to other parents, but they might not want to see that picture on your website or indeed on your social media feed. So when you're actually creating consent form for yourselves, you need to differentiate. You need to say, I am given permission for, and list the various places where you may want to use those images, and then they can either tick all boxes or not, depending on how they feel. In my experience, most parents are happy. You might get one or two that aren't, in which case you just have to respect their wishes. Having said that, you can be smart in how you take photographs. So you can take photographs in a way which doesn't identify individual children from behind them, but particularly by taking shots over the shoulder, or by looking at close-ups of hands if they're doing something creative play with their hands. So there are lots of ways of addressing the consent issue, even without showing faces. The one thing I would definitely advise against is taking photographs of groups of children, then trying to blank out specific faces. They look horrible, those photographs, and they actually raise more questions than they answer. You're almost actually pointing at the child you're trying to obscure by doing that. So don't go down that route. But equally, if you know you've got 5 children in a group and one of them there is no consent, then clearly you can sort of position the child in a way which allows you to photograph the other 4, so you don't have to worry about that. Risk is not just about consent, though. That's important. When we think about images, you also need to think about copyright. So it's very tempting to go onto Google Images and just pinch some photographs just to give you something to illustrate your post. But be very careful about that. Most of these images have copyright. And if you publish them, there is always the risk that some agency will come after you. And actually, the fees they ask of you, if that happens, can be quite high. So be very careful about using things. Look for the little watermark or mark that's usually on the image that will give you a clue that it's got copyright. So be careful, is all I would say on that. Other aspects of risk. I think that the main one also is data protection. So always ask yourself, is what I'm sharing through social media, is that something that should be in the public domain? It's a common sense question, but it's always worth asking yourself that. And equally, how are you doing it? So what do I mean by that? Well, it's very important that when you're posting as a setting, it's done through that official channel. So it's the setting that's posting. Now, if it's you, if you're a childminder, then clearly you're doing that as a professional childminder, but that creates challenges. So you've got to be very careful about having, for example, a Twitter account where you're mixing professional posts and personal posts. That really doesn't work. And if you've got staff, that's especially important for them. So no one should be putting out stuff about work on their personal social media feeds. They should probably not be befriending parents as private individuals. It just creates difficulties. It blurs the boundaries. And if there's a problem, it's much harder then to unravel that problem if things have become tangled. So think about social media policy. Have you got one in place? A really simple one that just shows where the boundaries are and who does what. How many people are actually posting on behalf of your setting? If it's more than one, how are they doing it? Are they using their personal phones? Are they deleting images after they've been posted? All these things just need thinking about. So some common sense thinking really will get you through it. Nothing to be frightened of. Just do what seems sensible and you'll be okay.
Brilliant. So I suppose if I'm a childminder, then it's perhaps best to have a personal Facebook page and then one specifically for my childminding. Yeah,
I would certainly, if Facebook is, bearing in mind what I said earlier about Facebook, probably being the place to focus your efforts. Yeah, but absolutely. It's so easy to create a page through your personal account. Yeah. And the page would be in the name of your setting, and you would brand it accordingly so it looks nice, make it look smart, have the appropriate imagery on there, a logo if you've got one, to differentiate between yourself as an individual and yourself as a professional.
Brilliant. So what happens if I get some negative comments? Because you very often see people post something and it's misinterpreted by the reader, or they disagree, and quite quickly there's a whole host of comments. How do I respond in that sort of a situation, Matt?
I think this is probably why people express their unease about being on social media at all in a professional capacity. This is probably what they're worried about most, is that someone says something negative about you. The first thing to say is that if someone's going to say something negative about you on social media, they'll do it anyway, regardless of whether you are on social media or not. It's better that you know about it. So from that perspective, you being on or off social media is not going to change anything. So it's better that you know about it. If someone actually posts something negative on your own Facebook page as a comment in response to something you've posted, then it is important that you engage with that and do something about it. The first thing is, if it's grossly inaccurate or defamatory, you do need to post something in response to that negative comment that sets the record straight. In doing that, make sure that you're not confrontational. You might be upset by it. Take 15, 20 minutes, calm down, take the emotion out of it, think very carefully about the wording you use, show it to a friend or colleague, test it before you publish it, because you don't want to fan the flames. But it is important that you counteract that. If you don't, people will think the negative comment is true, even if it blatantly isn't. So to set the record straight, first of all, and then take it offline. So then you need to approach the individual, if you know them, offline through an email or a phone call or what have you, and try and deal with it and address the problem there. There are times in extreme circumstances when someone really gets the beat between their teeth and just keeps coming at you. If that happens, ultimately you can block them. So you can stop them posting on your page. And that's the ultimate sanction, really. You don't really want it to get to that stage, but you might have to. So there is a way of protecting yourself. If someone says something negative about you that's not on your feed, it's on theirs. So there might be a tweet or something on Instagram. You can't really engage with that because that would be you going onto their territory to sort of counteract them. So that in that circumstance, all again you can do is take it offline and try and contact them. What happens if the negative comment comes from someone you've never heard of? That's difficult. Then all you can do is ask around and try and find out who this person is and find out what the story is behind it, because usually there's a reason they're doing what they're doing. If you're still stuck, then again, use that ultimate sanction, just block them, take the damage away. So there are some very sensible and common sense steps you can take to protect yourself. Don't worry about this. In my experience, as someone that's working in social media all the time, it's pretty rare.
Oh, that's great. That's very reassuring. Thanks, Matt. Some great tips there. So I suppose if I could just ask you to summarise why I should be using social media, would you be able to do that for us?
Yes, of course. I would say these days, it's by far the most straightforward and indeed the cheapest way of reaching the people you want to reach, because they're all there anyway. If you have found any of the tips that I've shared with you today useful, then you shouldn't find it too difficult to come up with really useful ideas to talk about what your setting is all about. And every time you do that, you're selling yourself. You're actually promoting what you do. And you're even without saying, come on down, come and visit our setting, which sometimes you can do, but you don't have to do it every day. You'll just slowly build your reputation and your brand. And this is very important, I haven't said this earlier, it's a real direct causal link between how active you are and how many people follow you. So if you're active all the time, you will find that your audience naturally grows. Why does that matter? Because then when you've got something really important to say, there are people listening. So for all these reasons, you should be on social media. And also, it doesn't have to be you. If you have a team, find the person in your team who's got a natural flair for this, and use them to help you and support you. You may not need to even leave your comfort zone to actually make this a success for you. But it really, any commercial organization these days who's not on social media is missing out.
Oh, well, that's great. Thanks, Matt. And I suppose, with the current situation with the pandemic, it's even more important to be reaching out to potential customers virtually and, using the various different methods as well. So
that's a very good point, actually, because let's face it, the best form of advertising is word of mouth. It's when one parent tells another good parent how great your setting is. And that parent the second parent's much more likely to believe that and may well come and check you out and find out about you and send their own child to you. So where is the word of mouth now? Actually, it's the conversations online on social media. So again, social media is now part of that word of mouth. And, think about the current situations of what do people want to hear about at the moment, as well as all those great things that you're doing as a setting. It's about the health and safety of their child. So it's about the precautions you're taking, the special steps you're taking to make them safe, the special facilities you may have if you've got great outdoor space that children can use at this time. So make sure that you're pressing the right buttons. get inside the heads of the parents and think about what's concerning them at the moment.
Oh, that's great, Matt. Thank you very much. I'm hoping that that's inspired the people that are watching to really consider social media if they aren't already using it, but also refreshing people to get back into it and rebrand perhaps and start using it more effectively. So thank you very much, Matt. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye.